A young nurse bathed a millionaire in a coma. But when he suddenly woke up, his first words shocked her. She was just an intern. He was the billionaire CEO. But one unexpected moment changed everything. Elisa Martin, an ambitious young woman from a struggling background, lands an internship at Dax Corp, one of the most powerful companies in the country. But her first day is an unmitigated disaster, culminating in a humiliating encounter with Ethan Pfizer, the enigmatic billionaire CEO. Determined to prove herself, Elisa quickly rises through the ranks with her intelligence and determination. But as she earns a place at the top, tensions begin to simmer, both in the boardroom and between her and Ethan. He is powerful, controlled, and untouchable. She is fearless, brilliant, and impossible to ignore. The more they clash, the stronger their connection grows. But when office politics, corporate rivalries, and secrets from Ethan's past threaten everything, Elisa must decide. Will she fight for her place at Dax Corp? Or will she risk it all for something even greater? A disastrous first day, a powerful CEO, and a connection neither of them saw coming. Stay till the end, because this is a story about power, ambition, and the one thing money can't buy. Some moments change everything. Some love stories defy all odds. And this one? It's just getting started. Hello everyone. I'm the narrator. Today, I bring you a millionaire love story. A love that rises above all challenges. Where hearts find each other in a world of luxury. True wealth isn't just money. It's love that lasts. Do you believe in destined love? If so, like, share, comment, and subscribe to Millionaire Love Stories for more heart-touching stories. Now, let's step into this story together. Session 1. The Unseen Listener. Anna Monroe pushed open the heavy oak door of Grant Carter's suite. The faint scent of antiseptic mixing with the faint trace of luxury the room still held. After weeks of working here, she no longer paused to take it all in. The dim chandeliers overhead, the polished mahogany furniture, the breathtaking view of the city skyline. Now, her focus was solely on the man lying in the center of it all. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she murmured, though she didn't expect a reply. She never did. Grant Carter's once magnetic presence was now confined to a silent, still form. His chest rose and fell in shallow, measured breaths. The machines kept their rhythm, the steady beep of the heart monitor, the faint hiss of oxygen, providing a cruel kind of reassurance that he was still here. That he still existed, but for how long, that, no one could say. Anna approached the bed, her expression calm but her heart heavy. In her few years as a nurse, she'd cared for patients in all kinds of conditions. But there was something uniquely unsettling about Grant's state. His body was here, but his mind was locked away, unreachable. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that, deep down, someone was still listening. She filled a basin with warm water, wrung out a clean cloth, and began her routine. Each movement was methodical, purposeful. She started at his left hand, carefully wiping down his fingers, his wrist, his forearm. As her cloth passed over his skin, she couldn't help but notice the contrast. Beneath the medical pallor, he still looked like the man whose photo had once graced the covers of business magazines. Strong jawline, dark hair, sharp features. Even in this state, he was striking. But now, his strength lay dormant, hidden under layers of stillness and time. Her voice broke the silence. "The weather's finally warming up," she said softly, her tone conversational. "You'd probably laugh if you could hear me talking about the weather of all things." She moved to his other hand, the cloth gentle against his skin. "The cherry blossoms are blooming. I saw them on my walk this morning. They always make the city feel softer somehow. Not so busy." There was no reply, of course. The steady beeping of the monitor was the only sound that greeted her words. But she'd grown used to it. Talking to him had become part of the routine, part of the care. It wasn't just for him. She realized, it was for her, too. It reminded her that there was still a person here, not just a patient. "I saw a photo of you once," she admitted, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Before all this, you were at some fancy gala, wearing this sharp black suit. I can't imagine you ever sitting still long enough to let someone like me tell you about the weather. But here we are." She dipped the cloth back into the basin, letting the warmth seep into her hand. "They say people in comas can still hear. You know, maybe you're just biding your time." waiting for the right moment to wake up and tell me I've been talking too much." As the words left her mouth, she felt a strange pang in her chest. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that her words weren't just filling the empty air, that they were reaching him somehow. But every time she looked at his face, still and serene, she wondered if she was fooling herself. She moved onto his shoulders, carefully adjusting the hospital gown to clean his skin. The warmth of the cloth seemed to radiate through her fingers, a small reminder of his humanity. Her touch was gentle, almost reverent. She wasn't just wiping away the residue of the day. She was doing her best to give him dignity, to keep him connected to the world that had seemingly left him behind. "You know," she said, her tone lighter now, "if you wake up and find out I've been gossiping about you, you can't hold it against me. It's not like you gave me any material to work with." Her lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. It was silly, talking like this, but in the quiet of the room, it felt almost natural. "I'll tell you a secret," she continued, her voice conspiratorial. "The coffee machine in the staff lounge? It's terrible. I'm convinced it's a relic from the last century. I keep thinking, if Grant Carter were awake, he'd probably just buy the hospital a new one. But then again, you're probably the kind of guy who has his coffee flown in from some exclusive roaster in Italy. Right?" The image made her chuckle softly. She could almost picture him raising an eyebrow, smirking at her for such a ridiculous assumption. She finished the last of her cleaning, carefully folding the towel and setting it aside. Her hands stilled for a moment, resting on the edge of the bed. She looked down at him, at the man who had once seemed untouchable, invincible. Now he was just human, vulnerable, silent, and trapped in a state that no amount of money or power could change. But he was still here. And as long as he was here, she would be too. "I don't know if you can hear me," she said softly, "but I'm going to keep talking anyway. Because maybe, one day, you'll wake up and realize you weren't alone." With that, she stood, gathered the basin, and quietly left the room, leaving the soft hum of the machines and the faint scent of antiseptic behind. Session 1. The Unseen Listener. Anna Monroe pushed open the heavy oak door of Grant Carter's suite. The faint scent of antiseptic mixing with the faint trace of luxury the room still held. After weeks of working here, she no longer paused to take it all in. The dim chandeliers overhead, the polished mahogany furniture, the breathtaking view of the city skyline. Now, her focus was solely on the man lying in the center of it all. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she murmured, though she didn't expect a reply. She never did. Grant Carter's once magnetic presence was now confined to a silent, still form. His chest rose and fell in shallow, measured breaths. The machines kept their rhythm, the steady beep of the heart monitor, the faint hiss of oxygen, providing a cruel kind of reassurance that he was still here, that he still existed. But for how long? That, no one could say. Anna approached the bed, her expression calm but her heart heavy. In her few years as a nurse, she'd cared for patients in all kinds of conditions. But there was something uniquely unsettling about Grant's state. His body was here, but his mind was locked away, unreachable. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that, deep down, someone was still listening. She filled a basin with warm water, wrung out a clean cloth, and began her routine. Each movement was methodical, purposeful. She started at his left hand, carefully wiping down his fingers, his wrist, his forearm. As her cloth passed over his skin, she couldn't help but notice the contrast. Beneath the medical pallor, he still looked like the man whose photo had once graced the covers of business magazines. Strong jawline, dark hair, sharp features. Even in this state, he was striking. But now, his strength lay dormant, hidden under layers of stillness and time. Her voice broke the silence. "The weather's finally warming up," she said softly, her tone conversational. "You'd probably laugh if you could hear me talking about the weather of all things." She moved to his other hand, the cloth gentle against his skin. "The cherry blossoms are blooming. I saw them on my walk this morning. They always make the city feel softer somehow. Not so busy." There was no reply, of course. The steady beeping of the monitor was the only sound that greeted her words. But she'd grown used to it. Talking to him had become part of the routine, part of the care. It wasn't just for him. She realized, it was for her, too. It reminded her that there was still a person here, not just a patient. "I saw a photo of you once," she admitted, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Before all this, you were at some fancy gala, wearing this sharp black suit. I can't imagine you ever sitting still long enough to let someone like me tell you about the weather. But here we are." She dipped the cloth back into the basin, letting the warmth seep into her hand. "They say people in comas can still hear. You know, maybe you're just biding your time, waiting for the right moment to wake up and tell me I've been talking too much." As the words left her mouth, she felt a strange pang in her chest. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that her words weren't just filling the empty air, that they were reaching him somehow. But every time she looked at his face, still and serene, she wondered if she was fooling herself. She moved onto his shoulders, carefully adjusting the hospital gown to clean his skin. The warmth of the cloth seemed to radiate through her fingers, a small reminder of his humanity. Her touch was gentle, almost reverent. She wasn't just wiping away the residue of the day. She was doing her best to give him dignity, to keep him connected to the world that had seemingly left him behind. "You know," she said, her tone lighter now, "if you wake up and find out I've been gossiping about you, you can't hold it against me. It's not like you gave me any material to work with." Her lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. It was silly, talking like this, but in the quiet of the room, it felt almost natural. "I'll tell you a secret," she continued, her voice conspiratorial. "The coffee machine in the staff lounge? It's terrible. I'm convinced it's a relic from the last century. I keep thinking, if Grant Carter were awake, he'd probably just buy the hospital a new one. But then again, you're probably the kind of guy who has his coffee flown in from some exclusive roaster in Italy. Right?" The image made her chuckle softly. She could almost picture him raising an eyebrow, smirking at her for such a ridiculous assumption. She finished the last of her cleaning, carefully folding the towel and setting it aside. Her hands stilled for a moment, resting on the edge of the bed. She looked down at him, at the man who had once seemed untouchable, invincible. Now he was just human, vulnerable, silent, and trapped in a state that no amount of money or power could change. But he was still here. And as long as he was here, she would be too. "I don't know if you can hear me," she said softly, "but I'm going to keep talking anyway. Because maybe, one day, you'll wake up and realize you weren't alone." With that, she stood, gathered the basin, and quietly left the room, leaving the soft hum of the machines and the faint scent of antiseptic behind. Session 2. Signs of Life. The routine continued. Day after day, Anna Monroe arrived promptly at 7 each morning, her polished sneakers squeaking faintly against the hospital floor as she pushed open the door to Grant Carter's suite. The room always greeted her the same way: stillness, the muted hum of medical equipment, and the faint scent of clean linens. Despite the predictability, each shift carried with it a quiet hope, a fragile thought she dared not voice. This morning was no different. She entered with her supplies, set them down on the counter, and began preparing a fresh basin of warm water. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said lightly, as though greeting an old friend. She liked to think he could hear her, even if he couldn't respond. As she crossed to his bedside, the soft beep of the heart monitor offered a steady rhythm. It was a comforting sound, a reminder that, in the most basic way, he was still alive. She pulled the stool closer, settled into her routine, and dipped the cloth into the warm water. With careful precision, she began to clean his arm, starting at the wrist and working her way upward. The warmth of the cloth against his skin reminded her that he was more than just a patient. He was a person, someone who had lived a full life before the accident that had taken so much from him. Her voice filled the quiet room. "It's supposed to rain later today," she said, not the dramatic, thunderstorm kind, just a steady drizzle. "I always liked the sound of rain when I was little. Used to make up stories about it. Silly things, like how the raindrops were on a secret mission to tell flowers their bedtime stories." She paused, smiling faintly at the memory. "Maybe I'll tell you one of those sometime. I mean, I'm already talking to you like you're listening. So why not?" Her words floated into the silence. Unanswered, she moved to his other arm, her touch steady and gentle. As she worked, her mind drifted, wondering what Grant might have been like before the accident. The world knew him as a driven, ruthless CEO, a man who built his empire with unyielding ambition. But what about the person beneath the headlines? The man who had family, friends, maybe someone he loved? Did he ever sit back and enjoy the little things? Like a quiet morning or the sound of rain? She shook the thought away and focused on her task. Once she finished his arms, she carefully adjusted his gown to clean his shoulders and chest. Her movements were smooth, almost automatic, but her mind stayed engaged. She made it a point to speak to him, even if only to fill the silence. Did you know, she mused, that people in comas can sometimes hear what's going on around them? That's what some researchers say. Anyway, I mean, if you're hearing me, you're probably wondering who the heck this chatty nurse is and why I can't stop talking about the weather. Her voice softened, but I like to think you're listening, even if you can't let me know. I guess it helps me feel like I'm doing something more than just going through the motions. She dipped the cloth back into the basin, watching the water ripple as she wrung it out. The room remained silent save for the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. But something felt different. It was subtle, so subtle she almost dismissed it. But then she saw it. A slight movement. Her breath caught. She froze, staring at his hand. It was faint, so faint she could have imagined it. The fingers twitched ever so slightly. Her heart began to race. Was it a reflex? A trick of the light? She leaned closer, her eyes fixed on his hand, waiting, hoping. Nothing. The hand lay still, unmoving against the pristine white sheets. Anna let out a slow breath, her shoulders sagging. Perhaps she'd imagined it. She'd been working long hours. After all, and it wasn't unusual for muscle spasms to occur in coma patients. That's what Dr. Harris always said, don't get your hopes up over minor movements. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. The rest of her shift passed uneventfully. But the memory of that small, almost imperceptible twitch stayed with her. She mentioned it to Dr. Harris before leaving for the day. Her words cautious but tinged with a flicker of hope. His fingers moved, she said, watching his expression carefully. I think it was more than just a spasm. Dr. Harris arched a skeptical brow. Anna, you've seen how these things go. Coma patients can have involuntary movements that don't mean anything. I know, she said quickly. I've seen them before, but this felt different. I can't explain it. He sighed, rubbing his temples. We'll run a few tests. But I don't want you getting too attached to the idea that he's waking up. These cases are unpredictable at best. Anna nodded, though her heart sank a little. She knew he was right. She'd seen the statistics, the long odds, but she couldn't help what she felt. Something about Grant's condition seemed to be changing, no matter how small the signs. The next morning, she returned to his suite, her hope tempered by the realities of her profession. As she prepared the basin and gathered her supplies, she replayed the previous day's events in her mind. Was she grasping at straws? Letting her emotions cloud her judgment? She sat beside him and began the familiar routine. This time, she stayed quiet, focusing on her movements, on the warmth of the cloth, on the rhythm of her breathing. As she reached his left hand, she hesitated. Her fingers hovered over his palm. Was she imagining things? Was she projecting her hope onto him? Then it happened again. A twitch. This time, she was sure of it. His fingers shifted, just barely, but enough to make her heart skip a beat. Her eyes widened, and she leaned in, her voice a trembling whisper. Grant, can you hear me? No response, but the small movement was enough to send her mind racing. She finished her task with shaky hands, her thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities. What if he was starting to come back? What if he was trying to respond? She didn't know what it meant, but she couldn't ignore it. Something was happening, and it felt like the first ray of light after a long, dark night. Session 3. First Signs of Awareness. The soft rhythm of Grant Carter's heart monitor became a backdrop to Anna Monroe's every thought. She had seen the twitch again. She was certain of it. Twice now, the fingers on his left hand had shifted, and that faint, almost imperceptible movement had lodged itself in her chest like a spark waiting to catch. But she was still alone with her hope. Dr. Harris remained cautious, reminding her that reflexes were common, and the hospital staff carried on as if nothing had changed. Don't get your hopes up too high, he'd said, and she'd nodded, biting her lip to keep from arguing. But every morning, as she entered the suite and began her routine, she couldn't help but wonder if today would be different. It was the third day after the first twitch when Anna noticed something new. She was adjusting Grant's pillow, her hands gentle as she turned his head slightly to make him more comfortable. His face remained as still as ever, his chest rising and falling in the same steady rhythm. But as she tucked the blanket back around him, she thought she felt it again, his fingers brushing her wrist. Not a spasm this time, but a deliberate pressure. "Grant?" she whispered, her heart hammering. She leaned in closer, staring at his hand. It lay still on the sheets, as if nothing had happened. But Anna wasn't imagining it. She had felt it, a faint grip that made her pulse race. She held her breath, waiting for another sign. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. And just as she began to doubt herself again, his fingers twitched once more. This time, she didn't hesitate. She reached out and carefully placed her hand over his. His skin was warm under her palm, and she felt the faintest movement, a slow, deliberate squeeze. It was weak, tentative, but it was real. "Grant," she said again, her voice trembling, "if you can hear me, squeeze my hand." A long moment passed, and Anna wondered if she was asking for too much. But then, ever so faintly, his fingers tightened around hers. The grip was almost non-existent, but it sent a wave of emotion crashing over her. She squeezed back gently, tears springing to her eyes. "You're coming back," she whispered, unable to keep the hope from her voice. "You're really coming back." The room felt charged with a new energy, as if the stillness had been broken by that single, fragile movement. Anna stayed there for what felt like hours, her hand resting lightly over his, willing him to give another sign. She talked to him in low tones, telling him about her day, about the rain she could hear outside the window, about the way the city lights looked from the hospital rooftop. And even though he didn't respond, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was listening. By the time Dr. Harris arrived to check in, Anna could hardly contain herself. She told him about the squeeze, her words tumbling out in a rush. Dr. Harris raised an eyebrow, his skeptical expression returning. "A hand squeeze could be reflexive," he said, flipping through Grant's chart. "But it wasn't like that." Anna insisted. "It was deliberate. It happened twice." Dr. Harris sighed, his gaze softening slightly. "We'll keep an eye on it. I'll have the team run more tests. But let's not jump to conclusions yet." Anna nodded, though her hands still felt warm from the faint pressure of Grant's grip. She wasn't jumping to conclusions, she was holding on to hope. The next morning, as the sun peeked through the window, Anna arrived early, her heart fluttering with anticipation. She wasn't expecting a miraculous recovery, but she felt certain she would see more signs. She began her routine as always, talking to Grant as she worked. "You'll never believe what happened last night," she said, wringing out the washcloth. "I got stuck in the elevator with one of the surgeons. The poor guy had just spilled coffee all over himself, and he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Honestly, it was kind of hilarious." She chuckled, glancing at his face. He looked the same as ever, his lashes dark against his pale cheeks, his expression serene, but Anna swore she saw the faintest flicker behind his closed eyelids. It was so quick she might have missed it if she hadn't been watching so closely. "Was that you, Grant?" she asked softly. "Are you trying to wake up?" Another flicker. It was subtle, just a twitch of his eyelids. But it was there. Anna's heart leapt. She leaned closer, searching his face for any further sign of movement. "Open your eyes, Grant," she urged gently. "I know it's hard, but I'm here. You're not alone." The room remained still, the steady beeping of the monitor the only sound. Anna stayed at his side, her hand resting lightly on his. Her breath held as she waited. She spoke softly, encouraging him, telling him she believed in him. Hours passed, but that single flicker was enough to keep her hope alive. When the tests came back later that day, Dr. Harris admitted that there were signs of increased brain activity. "It doesn't mean he's waking up," he warned, "but it's progress." Progress. The word stuck with Anna. She didn't expect miracles, she just wanted him to keep fighting, to keep showing these small signs of life. Over the next few days, the flickers became more frequent. His fingers twitched again, and once or twice she thought she saw his lips move as if he were trying to form words. She didn't tell Dr. Harris every time, knowing he would only dismiss it as reflexive. But Anna believed something was changing. She could feel it. By the end of the week, Anna sat beside Grant's bed, her hands folded in her lap as she watched his face. She had never felt so connected to someone who couldn't even speak to her. She leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if you can hear me, but you're doing amazing," she said. "I know it's hard, but don't give up. I'm here. I'll be here every day." Her hand brushed his, and she felt it again, a weak, tentative squeeze. It wasn't her imagination. Grant Carter was trying to come back, and Anna Monroe was determined to be there when he did. Session 4. Grant Awakens. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor had become a constant companion in Anna's life. A metronome ticking off the long hours she spent in the private hospital suite. She had grown used to the quiet, to the faint hum of the IV machine, to the warm morning sunlight filtering through the large windows. She'd grown used to Grant's stillness, his peaceful but unmoving presence. Yet lately, something was different. It started with the twitch of a finger, then a flutter of an eyelid. Small, subtle movements that seemed to mean nothing, and yet to Anna, they meant everything. She had reported these signs to Dr. Harris, but his cautious nature kept her enthusiasm in check. He was still skeptical, hesitant to place too much hope in what could be involuntary spasms. But Anna knew better. She felt it in her bones. Each shift of his fingers, each barely there flicker of his eyelids, they were signs of life, of awareness. And though the progress was agonizingly slow, it was progress nonetheless. The next morning, Anna entered Grant's room early, determined to stick to her routine. She smoothed his pillow, adjusted his blanket, and began the gentle process of bathing his arms and chest. It had become second nature by now. But today her hands were trembling ever so slightly as she reached for the warm cloth. She couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. "You know, I've been thinking," Anna said softly, more to fill the silence than anything. "If you can hear me, maybe you're getting tired of listening to my voice all the time." She chuckled lightly, shaking her head. "But I have to say, Grant, you're the best listener I've ever had." She leaned over his still form, carefully wiping the cloth along his jawline. Her movements were slow and deliberate, her touch gentle. She paused for a moment, glancing at his face. His expression remained as it always did, serene and quiet, his dark lashes resting against his pale cheeks. Yet she couldn't help but wonder if somewhere, deep inside, he could sense her presence. And then it happened. At first, she thought it was her imagination. His lips twitched, barely, but enough to stop her in her tracks. Anna froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She leaned in closer, searching his face. "Grant?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Another twitch. This time, his eyelids fluttered. Anna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her pulse raced, and she felt a surge of hope so strong it left her breathless. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. "Grant, if you can hear me, can you open your eyes?" It was as though time itself had slowed. The room held its breath, the air heavy with anticipation. Anna's heart pounded as she waited, her gaze fixed on his face. And then, after what felt like an eternity, his eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, his dark pupils struggling to adjust to the light. But they were open, those deep, piercing eyes that she had only seen in photographs. Anna felt tears prick at the corners of her own eyes, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch his cheek. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh my God, you're awake." Grant blinked slowly, his gaze wandering around the room before finally landing on her. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Anna grabbed a cup of water from the bedside table and held it to his lips. "Here," she said, her voice gentle. "Take it slow." He sipped the water, his movements weak but deliberate. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Where?" His brows furrowed, confusion clouding his expression. "Where am I?" Anna swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "You're at Westbridge Hospital. You've been in a coma, Grant, but you're awake now. You're going to be okay." He blinked again, his gaze searching hers. "How long?" he rasped. Anna hesitated. "A little over a year." His eyes widened slightly, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "A year?" he repeated, disbelief coloring his tone. "I know it's a lot to take in," Anna said quickly, reaching for his hand and squeezing it gently. "But you're here now, and you're safe. We'll take it one step at a time." For a moment, he simply stared at her, his dark eyes filled with confusion, fear, and something she couldn't quite place. And then, he nodded slowly, as if he didn't have the strength to argue. "Rest," she urged, brushing his hair back gently. "You're going to need your strength. I'll be here, okay? I'm not going anywhere." Grant's eyelids drooped, exhaustion quickly overtaking him. Anna stayed by his side, her own heart racing as she watched him drift off into a light sleep. When Dr. Harris arrived a short while later, Anna could hardly contain her excitement. She told him everything, how Grant had opened his eyes, how he'd spoken, how he seemed aware, even if only faintly. Dr. Harris, though still cautious, couldn't deny the evidence. He examined Grant thoroughly, nodding slowly as he noted the increased responsiveness. "This is remarkable," he said finally, glancing at Anna with an almost hesitant smile. "But we'll need to monitor him closely. There's still a long road ahead." Anna nodded, her heart full of both relief and anticipation. "I understand. I'll be here every step of the way." She meant it. Every step, every small victory, every moment of doubt, she would be there. For the first time in over a year, the stillness in that room was broken. Grant Carter was awake, and Anna's hope had finally turned into reality. Session 5. Confronting the Past. Grant Carter's life before the accident was a blur of boardrooms, bold decisions, and unrelenting ambition. It had been a world of power and precision, where every move was calculated and every outcome meticulously controlled. But now, as he sat propped up in his hospital bed, everything felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. The face staring back at him in the small mirror on the bedside table was familiar but foreign. Thinner than he remembered, pale and lined with fatigue. His once sharp jawline was softened by weeks of immobility, and the spark in his dark eyes was dimmed by the weight of what had happened. He had been awake for a week, and while his body fought to regain strength, his mind struggled to fill in the gaps. He couldn't remember the crash. He couldn't remember what led him to be on that road at that hour. And most frustrating of all, he couldn't remember the faces of the people who were supposed to be at his side. The fragments of memory that surfaced were disjointed, snippets of conversations. A faint recollection of a deal closing, a fleeting image of his office overlooking the city skyline. But when he tried to focus on the moment, everything changed. There was nothing but a frustrating blank. Anna was his anchor in the storm. She was there every day, her calm, steady presence reassuring him in a way no one else could. She brought warmth to the sterile hospital room, her voice a constant thread that kept him tethered to reality. It wasn't just the way she cared for him physically, it was the way she made him feel like more than just a patient. She treated him as a person, not a burden, and yet, even with her by his side, the questions loomed like dark clouds on the horizon. "Who else has come to see me?" Grant asked one afternoon, his voice still hoarse but growing stronger. He had been practicing his speech with Anna, the words coming easier with each passing day. Anna hesitated, her hand pausing mid-reach for his chart. She looked at him carefully, trying to gauge how much he could handle. "Well," she said slowly, "your half-brother, Nathan, came by once, but..." Grant's brows furrowed. The mention of Nathan's name sent a jolt of something through him, something sharp and unpleasant. "But what?" Anna sighed, pulling the chair closer to his bedside. But it wasn't exactly a supportive visit. He came in, stayed for a few minutes, and left without saying much. The staff said he hasn't been back since. Grant's jaw tightened. Nathan had always been a thorn in his side. Their relationship was strained at best, hostile at worst, while Grant had taken over their father's company and turned it into an empire. Nathan had spent years nursing a grudge, always convinced he was owed something more. They had clashed repeatedly, and though they shared blood, there was little love lost between them. "And my parents?" Grant asked, his tone clipped. Anna hesitated again. "Your mother visited a few times early on, but she's overseas now. Your father..." She trailed off, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I don't think he's been here at all." Grant's lips pressed into a thin line. He had never been close to his father. Their relationship had been built on expectations rather than affection. And after years of tense interactions, Grant had learned to stop expecting anything from him. Still, the confirmation stung more than he cared to admit. He didn't know what he'd been hoping for, maybe some sign that his family cared. That someone other than Anna had been waiting for him to wake up. But the truth was clear. The people who should have been there hadn't been. "What about my friends? My team at the company?" he pressed, trying to sound detached, as if it didn't matter. Anna shook her head gently. "I haven't seen anyone from your company here, Grant. No colleagues, no business partners. I think..." She hesitated again, clearly unsure how much to say. "Just say it, Anna," Grant said quietly. "I need to know." She took a deep breath. "I think they assumed you weren't going to wake up. After the first few months, most people stopped visiting. They moved on. The words settled in the room like a heavy weight. Grant's hands curled into fists on the blanket, his jaw tightening as he absorbed the reality. The empire he had built, the people he had relied on, the life he had worked so hard to control, none of it mattered when he was unconscious. Without him at the helm, they had simply moved forward without looking back. And while he understood the practicality of it, the realization left a bitter taste in his mouth. Moved on, he repeated, his voice hollow. Just like that, Anna reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm in a gesture of comfort. I stayed, she said softly. I'm still here. Grant turned his head toward her, meeting her steady gaze. In her eyes, he saw something he hadn't found in anyone else's: genuine care. Not born of obligation or duty, but of something deeper. She hadn't walked away, she hadn't given up, and in that moment, he realized how much that mattered. Anna wasn't just his nurse, she was his lifeline. The one person who had been there when no one else was. You're the only one who stayed, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Anna smiled faintly, her hand giving his arm a gentle squeeze. And I'm not going anywhere. They sat in silence for a while, the tension in the room easing as Grant let her words sink in. For the first time since waking up, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before: hope. If Anna could believe in him, maybe he could start believing in himself again. That evening, after Anna left, Grant stared out the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. He had been so focused on the life he'd lost that he hadn't considered the possibility of building something new. His memories were still fragmented, his body still weak, but he had one thing he hadn't had before: a chance to start over. And maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to do it alone. Session 6. Rebuilding Strength and Trust. As the days stretched into weeks, Grant's physical progress gained momentum. The once feeble attempts to sit up unassisted gave way to sitting and pivoting his legs over the side of the bed. The trembling steps he had taken with a walker became steady strides as he moved down the hospital corridors, escorted by the supportive hands of physical therapists. Still, his muscles ached in rebellion after months of disuse. Every success felt hard-earned, and every minor setback weighed heavily on his shoulders. Anna was always there, her voice calm and encouraging. You're doing better than yesterday, she said after a particularly grueling session of physical therapy. Just remember how far you've come. He managed a weak smile through the perspiration glistening on his forehead. And how far I still have to go, he muttered, flexing a leg that still felt like lead. You'll get there, Anna replied firmly, one step at a time. Her unwavering faith in him made all the difference. In the bleakest moments, when the pain of strained muscles and stiff joints made him question why he was pushing so hard, Anna's voice brought him back. One more rep, Grant, you can do it. And he did. Her belief in his recovery never faltered. And for that, Grant found himself fighting even harder. But regaining physical strength was only part of the challenge. The fractured memories of his accident and the uneasy silence from his family had taken a toll on his emotional state. Grant found himself grappling with a question he couldn't yet answer. Who had he been before the crash? And who did he want to be now? One evening, while resting in his room after another long day of therapy, Grant turned to Anna with a question that had been lingering in the back of his mind. Why did you stay? Anna looked at him, her brow furrowing slightly. What do you mean? Why didn't you walk away like everyone else? His voice was quiet but tinged with a vulnerability he rarely showed. You could have just done your job, clocked out, and left me to whatever this is. Anna hesitated, carefully folding the edges of the blanket around his legs as she considered her words. I guess I just saw someone who needed more than what they were getting, she said finally. I couldn't imagine lying in a bed for months, not having anyone there who really cared. I didn't want you to feel like you were alone in this. Grant's eyes searched her face, trying to find something in her expression that might reveal why she was so willing to give so much of herself. You didn't even know me, he said, shaking his head. I could have been a complete jerk before all this. Maybe, Anna admitted, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. But it doesn't matter now. What matters is the person you're becoming. And from where I'm standing, you're not doing so bad. Her answer left him quiet, her words echoing in his mind long after she had gone home for the night. He thought about how she spoke to him, not with pity or detachment, but with respect. It made him wonder if he was worthy of that respect, if he could become someone who earned it. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew he wanted to try. The following week brought unexpected news. Dr. Harris arrived during Grant's morning session, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "Grant, we need to talk about your brother." Grant's stomach tightened. He hadn't seen Nathan since he woke up, and every mention of his name brought a sense of unease. "What about him?" Dr. Harris exchanged a glance with Anna before continuing. "We've received information that Nathan may have been involved in certain financial dealings tied to the crash." Grant stared at him, the words sinking in like stones. "You mean he?" "We don't have all the details yet," Dr. Harris interrupted, "but it's enough to warrant a closer look." Grant's chest tightened, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Nathan, he should have known. The jealousy, the bitterness, Grant had seen it in his brother's eyes for years. And now, the possibility that Nathan had played a hand in nearly killing him filled him with a cold, simmering rage. Anna touched his arm gently, grounding him. "What matters now," she said softly, "is what you do next. You need to focus on getting stronger. Let the authorities handle the investigation." Grant exhaled sharply, his hands curling into fists. "I'll get stronger. All right, but not just for me." His voice hardened, his determination solidifying. If Nathan was involved in this, he's not getting away with it. The days that followed were filled with renewed purpose. Grant threw himself into his recovery, pushing past the pain, the frustration, and the lingering questions. With every step, every lift, every session, he felt a little closer to reclaiming the man he had been and forging a path toward the man he wanted to become. Anna remained by his side, her quiet strength a constant reminder that he wasn't fighting alone. But there was another layer to his determination, one he hadn't fully admitted to himself. It wasn't just about regaining his independence or confronting his brother. It was about proving to Anna, and perhaps to himself, that he was worth the faith she had placed in him. Each time he caught her smiling at his progress, each time her encouraging words pulled him through a tough session, it sparked something in him. It wasn't just respect. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, something that made his heart beat a little faster when she walked into the room. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling session that left him drenched in sweat and aching from head to toe, Anna handed him a bottle of water and a towel. "You're doing great," she said, her smile lighting up the room. "You'll be back to your old self in no time." Grant took the water, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "I don't want to go back to my old self," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Anna looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" He held her gaze, the words coming more easily than he expected. "I've had a lot of time to think. Anna, I don't want to just pick up where I left off. I want to be better. A better man, a better everything." For a moment, she said nothing. Then her smile softened, her eyes bright with something that looked almost like pride. "Well, you're off to a good start." Grant knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew there were battles ahead, physical, emotional, and now, possibly legal. But he also knew he wasn't facing them alone. And with Anna by his side, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could win. Session 7. Confronting the Past. Grant sat in his hospital room, the early morning sunlight filtering through the window. He felt stronger now, both physically and mentally. The physical therapy sessions had begun to pay off. He could walk unassisted, and his reflexes were steadily improving. Yet, there was a weight pressing on him, heavier than any muscle fatigue. Anna entered quietly, carrying the tablet where she logged his vitals and progress. She smiled when she saw him standing near the window, gazing out at the city below. "Good morning," she said softly. "You're up early." He turned, leaning slightly on the edge of the windowsill. "Morning," he replied, his voice steady. "I didn't sleep much." She tilted her head. "Thinking about your brother?" Grant nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, I can't stop wondering why he'd go to such extremes. I mean, I know we've never been close. But, trying to kill me?" Anna set the tablet down and crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. "Sometimes jealousy and resentment run deeper than we realize. And with the kind of money and power your family has, those feelings can turn dangerous." Grant exhaled sharply, his frustration evident. "I should have seen it coming. I should have been paying more attention. But I was too wrapped up in work and my own life to notice how far gone he was." Anna stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. You can't blame yourself for what he did. Grant, this wasn't your fault. He stared at the floor for a moment before looking up at her. I just keep thinking, if I had handled things differently. If I had reached out to him more, maybe he wouldn't have. He stopped, shaking his head. Never mind. I can't change the past. No, you can't. Anna agreed, but you can choose how you deal with it now. Her words sank in, and Grant found himself nodding slowly. She was right. Dwelling on what-ifs would only hold him back. It was time to focus on what he could do moving forward. Later that day, Grant met with his legal team. The room was filled with the sound of papers shuffling, the murmur of lawyers discussing strategies. Anna waited outside, not wanting to intrude on the legal proceedings but close enough to be there if he needed her. Grant sat at the head of the table, his posture strong, his voice steady. I want the truth out there, he said firmly. I want everyone to know what Nathan did, and I want him held accountable. One of the attorneys, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes, leaned forward. Mr. Carter, pursuing this publicly will attract significant media attention. Your family's reputation. Grant cut him off. My brother tried to kill me, he said, his tone cold. If my family's reputation takes a hit, so be it. I'm not covering this up. The room fell silent for a moment before another lawyer spoke up. We'll need to collect all the evidence and ensure that the charges are airtight. If you're certain about this, we'll proceed. I'm certain, Grant replied without hesitation. Do whatever it takes. That evening, Grant and Anna sat in the hospital garden. It had become a habit for them, escaping the sterile walls and finding some peace in the quiet outdoor space. The air was cool, and the faint scent of blooming flowers drifted on the breeze. You know, Grant began, it's strange. Before the accident, I never would have let something like this take over my life. I would have thrown money at it, hired the best lawyers, and moved on. Anna glanced at him. And now? Now, I want justice, he said, not just for me, but for everyone Nathan hurt. He didn't just betray me, he betrayed our entire family. Our employees, the people who trusted him. Anna nodded slowly. You've changed, Grant. You're not just thinking about yourself anymore. You're thinking about the bigger picture. He gave a small, humorless laugh. I guess almost dying will do that to you. They sat in silence for a moment before Anna asked, do you think you'll ever be able to forgive him? Grant's expression hardened. I don't know. Maybe someday. But right now, I just want to see him held accountable. Anna didn't push further. She understood that some wounds needed time to heal. As the legal proceedings against Nathan gained momentum, Grant found himself facing the media for the first time since his recovery. He stood at a podium, cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. His lawyers had advised him to keep his statement brief, but Grant felt it was important to speak from the heart. Good afternoon, he began, his voice clear and steady. I'm here today because I believe in accountability. I believe that no one, no matter their status or wealth, is above the law. He paused, glancing at the reporters before continuing. A year ago, I survived a horrific accident. I spent months in a coma and even more time rebuilding my life. It wasn't just a random tragedy. It was a deliberate act of violence. And the person responsible must face justice. Grant's gaze swept the room, his words firm. I'm not here to protect my family's reputation. I'm here to ensure that the truth comes out, no matter how difficult it may be. Thank you. As he stepped away from the podium, the reporters' voices rose in a chaotic chorus. But Grant ignored them. He had said what needed to be said. That night, back in his hospital room, Grant felt a sense of relief. He knew the road ahead would be tough. But taking that first step, speaking out, was empowering. Anna walked in, a warm smile on her face. I saw the press conference, she said, sitting down in the chair beside his bed. You did great. Thanks, Grant replied. It feels good to finally take control. She nodded. You're doing what needs to be done, Grant, and you're doing it the right way. He looked at her, his expression softening. I couldn't have gotten this far without you. Anna, you've been my anchor through all of this. Her cheeks flushed slightly, and she smiled. I just did my job. It's more than that, Grant said. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You gave me a reason to fight. Anna hesitated, then reached out and placed her hand over his. And I'll keep believing in you, Grant, because I know you're capable of so much more than you realize. His fingers curled around hers, a silent promise passing between them. They didn't need to say anything else. In that moment, they both knew they were on the right path, together. Session 8. A new threat. The following weeks passed in a blur of tests, meetings, and quiet moments in the hospital garden. Grant's recovery was progressing well, but the pressure was mounting. The investigation into Nathan's actions had revealed just how far his brother had gone to secure the family fortune. The betrayal had cut deeper than Grant ever imagined, leaving scars he wasn't sure would ever fully heal. Anna noticed the change in him, though his body grew stronger with each passing day. A heaviness lingered behind his sharp blue eyes. She found him one morning pacing the length of his hospital room, his phone clenched tightly in his hand. "Grant?" she called softly. Stepping inside, he turned sharply at her voice, his expression tight with frustration. "Sorry," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean to snap." Anna closed the door behind her and leaned against the wall. "It's okay. What's going on?" He hesitated, then set the phone down on the bedside table. "It's my board," he admitted. "Some of them are questioning my ability to return as CEO. They're saying I've been out of the picture for too long, that the company's direction has suffered." Anna frowned. "But you've been working to keep them informed, haven't you?" "I have," Grant said, his voice low. "But Nathan's mess put the entire company under a microscope. Investors are nervous, and some of the board members see this as an opportunity to push me out." Her eyes narrowed. "After everything you've been through, they're still questioning your leadership?" He sighed, leaning back against the edge of the bed. "It's not just the accident. It's Nathan. His actions have tarnished the Carter name, and they're using that as leverage. They want a fresh face, someone who can restore confidence." Anna stepped closer. "But you're the one who built that company. They can't just push you aside." Grant's jaw tightened. "They can try." As the days went on, Grant's sessions with his physical therapist became more grueling. Each step on the treadmill, each set of weights, felt like another battle. Anna stayed close, offering quiet encouragement when he needed it most. But she could see the toll it was taking on him. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging session, Grant collapsed onto the bench in the rehab center, sweat dripping down his face. He grabbed a towel and wiped his brow, his frustration clear. "This isn't just about getting back on my feet," he muttered, mostly to himself. Anna crouched beside him, handing him a water bottle. "What do you mean?" He looked at her, his expression raw. "If I don't get stronger, if I don't show them I can handle the pressure, everything I've built could slip away. My father's legacy, the company I poured my life into, they're ready to tear it apart." Anna placed a hand on his arm. "Then we'll keep pushing. You're not alone in this, Grant." He stared at her for a moment, then nodded. "Thanks, Anna. I don't know what I'd do without you." Late one evening, as Grant reviewed a stack of documents related to the company's ongoing challenges, Anna entered his hospital suite carrying 2 cups of coffee. She set them down on the small table by the window and joined him on the couch. "You're working late," she noted, eyeing the papers spread out before him. "Not much choice," he replied, rubbing his temple. "The board meeting is next week. I have to prove I'm still the right person for the job." Anna sipped her coffee, studying him carefully. "You know they're scared. That's why they're trying to undermine you. They know how capable you are." Grant let out a bitter laugh. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. Maybe I should just walk away. Let them have it." She shook her head. "That's not who you are. You've never been one to back down from a fight." He looked at her, his gaze softening. "You're right. It feels like I'm fighting on all fronts. Nathan's betrayal, the media frenzy, the board, and you're winning." Anna interrupted gently. "You've survived things most people couldn't even imagine. This is just another challenge, and I know you'll overcome it." Grant leaned back, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "You always know what to say." "It's because I believe in you," Anna said simply. "You've got this." The morning of the board meeting arrived, and Grant, now strong enough to walk unassisted, dressed in his signature tailored suit. As he stood before the mirror adjusting his tie, he caught Anna's reflection behind him. She was leaning against the doorframe, a faint smile on her lips. "Ready to remind them who's in charge?" she asked. He turned to face her, his expression calm but resolute. "I am now." The meeting itself was tense, the board members exchanging pointed questions and guarded glances. But Grant remained composed. He addressed their concerns head-on, outlining his vision for the company's future and the steps he had already taken to stabilize operations. when one particularly skeptical board member questioned his fitness to lead after such a long absence. Grant met their gaze directly. "I faced challenges most of you can't begin to understand, and I've come out stronger. If you think I'm not up to the task, you're mistaken. This company is my life's work, and I won't let anyone take that from me." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Slowly, heads began to nod in agreement. By the end of the meeting, the majority of the board was firmly back on his side. Later that evening, back at the hospital, Grant found Anna waiting for him in his room. She stood as he walked in, her smile growing as she took in his confident demeanor. "How did it go?" she asked. He loosened his tie, a small smirk playing on his lips. "They're backing me. I'm still CEO." Anna's smile widened. "I knew you could do it." Grant stepped closer, his expression softening. "Thank you, Anna. I couldn't have done this without you." She shook her head. "You've always had the strength, Grant. I just helped you see it." He reached out, his hand brushing hers. "That means more than you know." As they stood there, the tension of the past weeks began to melt away. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time in a long while, Grant felt hope, and with Anna by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. Session 9. Confronting the Shadows. The days following Grant's victory at the board meeting should have felt like a triumph. Instead, they were filled with an unshakable unease. Despite regaining his position as CEO and reclaiming some semblance of normalcy, Grant couldn't shake the sense that something was still lurking in the shadows. The betrayal he'd uncovered with Nathan had planted a seed of doubt that continued to grow. How far had it spread? Who else might have been involved? Every glance at the Carter Enterprises logo seemed to mock him, his name, his legacy, now tarnished by deception. Anna noticed the change in him almost immediately. Grant, who had been so resolute and determined in recent weeks, now carried a weight she couldn't quite identify. His usually sharp eyes seemed clouded, and he often stared off into space as if lost in thoughts he didn't want to share. It worried her, but she knew pushing too hard might cause him to retreat further. "Grant," she said gently one evening as they sat in his hospital suite. She'd brought takeout from his favorite restaurant in an attempt to lift his spirits. "What's going on? You've been quiet ever since the meeting." He looked up from the untouched plate of food in front of him. His expression conflicted. "I can't shake the feeling that Nathan wasn't working alone," he admitted, his voice low. He might have been the one who tampered with the brakes, but he didn't have the resources or connections to pull this off by himself. Someone else had to be helping him. Anna frowned. "What makes you think that?" "Something isn't adding up," Grant continued, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "The financial transactions we uncovered only tell part of the story. Nathan didn't have direct access to certain company accounts. Someone on the inside must have fed him information, someone high up." A chill ran down Anna's spine. "Do you have any idea who?" Grant shook his head. "Not yet, but I need to find out. If there's still a threat within the company, everything I've done so far won't matter. The board might trust me again now. But if another scandal breaks, it could all come crashing down." Anna reached out, placing a hand over his. "Then let's figure it out. Whatever it takes, I'll help you." Over the next several days, Grant and Anna worked tirelessly, poring over old financial records, internal memos, and security logs. Grant's instincts told him that the answer was hidden somewhere in the paper trail, though it often felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. Each new lead seemed to end in a dead end, frustratingly close, yet just out of reach. One night, as they sat surrounded by files and stacks of papers, Anna let out a frustrated sigh. "Whoever's behind this covered their tracks well," she muttered, flipping through yet another folder. "It's like they knew exactly where we'd look." Grant's brow furrowed. "Exactly," he said, a hint of realization dawning in his eyes. "They knew where we'd look." "What are you thinking?" Anna asked, watching him closely. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if piecing together a puzzle in his mind. "Nathan always envied me. He would have done anything to get what I had. But he wasn't the patient type. He wouldn't have been able to keep a secret like this on his own. That means someone close to me must have been feeding him information, knowing that if things went south, all the blame would fall on Nathan." Anna tilted her head, considering his words. "Someone who was already in your inner circle. Someone you trusted." Grant nodded slowly. and someone who had access to all the right files. The right people. The breakthrough came one rainy afternoon. Anna had been combing through digital archives from a few months before the accident. While Grant had been in surgery and under sedation, his corporate email had been accessed. The IP address was traced to a location outside the Carter Enterprises building. But the login credentials were unmistakably his. "This," Anna said, pointing at the screen, "this doesn't make sense. Someone used your login while you were in the hospital." Grant frowned, leaning in to get a closer look. Whoever it was must have been planning this for a long time. They knew the timing would have to be perfect. Anna's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Grant, who had your login information? Who else would have known your passwords?" His face darkened, the realization hitting him. "One person," he said, his voice tight. "My chief financial officer, Raymond Burke. He's been with the company since the beginning. I trusted him implicitly." Anna's heart sank. If it's him. Grant nodded grimly. It would explain a lot. He had the access, the resources, and he'd know exactly how to cover his tracks. And he's the one who recommended Nathan take on that advisory role right before the accident. Confronting Raymond wouldn't be easy. Grant had always relied on him as a steady hand, a voice of reason in a sea of corporate chaos. But now, as the pieces fell into place, the trust he once had felt like a cruel joke. He couldn't go into this without evidence. So he and Anna doubled down on their efforts, carefully assembling the proof they needed. Late one evening, Grant received a message from a trusted contact in the IT department. They'd managed to pull logs that showed Raymond accessing sensitive files on the same night the tampered financial transactions were authorized. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was close enough. "We have him," Grant said quietly, showing Anna the email. She scanned it quickly, her eyes narrowing. "So what now?" "Now," Grant said, his jaw tightening, "we confront him. He'll deny it at first. But once we lay out the evidence, he'll have no choice but to come clean." The confrontation took place in a quiet conference room at Carter Enterprises headquarters. Grant had arranged a meeting under the guise of a routine financial review. Raymond arrived on time, as he always did, looking calm and composed. As the meeting progressed, Grant gradually shifted the conversation toward the financial discrepancies. Raymond's expression remained carefully neutral. But Anna, seated quietly in the corner, could see the subtle tension in his posture. When Grant finally presented the logs and the timeline of events, Raymond's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. It was brief, barely perceptible, but enough for Grant to know he was right. "I'm not sure what you're implying," Raymond said smoothly, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Grant leaned forward, his tone sharp. "I'm not implying anything, Raymond. I'm stating a fact. You fed information to Nathan. You gave him access to accounts he shouldn't have had. And you knew that if things went wrong, he'd be the one to take the fall." Raymond's jaw tightened. "Grant, you know me. I've been with this company since the beginning. Why would I? Because you thought I wouldn't survive." Grant interrupted, his voice cold. "You thought I'd never wake up to see the damage you and Nathan caused. But I did, and now I'm looking right at you." For a long moment, the room was silent. Then, Raymond sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I didn't think it would come to this," he admitted quietly. "I didn't want to hurt you, Grant. But Nathan, he offered me a way out. I was tired of being in the background, always in your shadow." Anna felt a wave of anger and disgust. But she held her tongue, letting Grant handle it. "You didn't just betray me," Grant said, his voice low and steady. "You betrayed the company, everyone who trusted us, and you almost got me killed." Raymond's gaze dropped. I made a mistake. I'm sorry." Grant stood, his expression unreadable. "It's too late for apologies. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." As Raymond was led away, Grant let out a long, heavy breath. Anna moved to his side, resting a hand on his arm. "It's over," she said softly. Grant nodded, though the weight of the betrayal still lingered. "It's over," he repeated, more to convince himself than anyone else. Session 10. A new beginning. The days following Raymond's removal from the company felt like a fog lifting. The shadow of doubt that had lingered over Carter Enterprises for so long began to fade. While the betrayal still stung, Grant took solace in the fact that he and Anna had uncovered the truth before more damage could be done. He was determined to rebuild not just his company, but also his own life, this time on a stronger, more honest foundation. The first step was cleaning house. With Anna's support, Grant initiated a complete review of the company's leadership. He sat through long, grueling meetings, questioning department heads, reviewing internal policies, and re-evaluating the structure of his executive team. Transparency became his mantra. If he was going to lead Carter Enterprises into the future, he needed to ensure that everyone around him was aligned not just with the company's goals, but also with the values he wanted to uphold. Anna often joined him for these sessions, acting as both a sounding board and a source of strength. "You're doing the right thing," she told him one night after a particularly tense meeting. "By demanding accountability, you're showing the board, the employees, and even yourself that Carter Enterprises can be better than it was before." Her words bolstered Grant's resolve. For too long, he'd let others manipulate his company's direction while he remained focused solely on the bottom line. Now, he realized that true leadership required more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. It required trust, empathy, and the willingness to confront hard truths. As the company began to stabilize, Grant turned his attention to his personal life. For months, his focus had been on survival and uncovering the truth. Now that the danger had passed, he could finally consider what came next. And what he kept returning to, again and again, was Anna. Their relationship had grown slowly, organically. What began as a bond forged in the crucible of his recovery had blossomed into something much deeper. Anna had been there for him during his darkest hours, not because she was obligated to, but because she cared, and in doing so, she had shown him what real connection looked like, something he'd spent years avoiding, perhaps even fearing. One evening, as they walked along the quiet city streets, Grant turned to her. "You know," he began, his tone uncharacteristically soft, "I don't think I ever properly thanked you." Anna glanced up at him, a curious smile playing on her lips. "For what?" "For everything," he said simply. "For believing in me when no one else did. For refusing to give up on me. He paused, searching for the right words. "For helping me become someone I can be proud of." Anna stopped walking, looking at him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "Grant," she said gently, "you did that on your own. I just gave you a little push when you needed it." He smiled, reaching out to take her hand. "Either way, I'm grateful." They continued walking, hand in hand, the silence between them warm and comfortable. For the first time in years, Grant felt at peace. The city lights reflected in Anna's eyes as she glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said after a moment, "it's okay to let yourself be happy." He stopped and turned to face her fully. "I am happy," he said, his voice firm, "but I want more than that. I want to share my life with someone who makes me better. Someone who inspires me every day." He squeezed her hand, his heart pounding. "I want that someone to be you." Anna's breath hitched, her cheeks flushing as she processed his words. "Grant, He cut her off with a gentle smile. "I know it's a lot to take in, but I've spent so much of my life hiding from what I really want. And I don't want to hide anymore. I love you." Anna. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she stepped closer, resting her free hand against his chest. "I love you too," she whispered. Grant pulled her into a tender embrace, the weight of the past finally lifting as they stood together under the city lights. For once, he wasn't thinking about the company, the betrayal, or the future. All that mattered was the woman in his arms and the life they were about to build together. In the weeks that followed, Grant and Anna worked side by side, not just on Carter Enterprises, but also on their relationship. Grant learned to let his guard down, to open up about his fears and vulnerabilities. Anna, in turn, shared more of her own dreams and insecurities. Their love grew stronger with each passing day, rooted in mutual respect and understanding. At the same time, Carter Enterprises began to thrive once again, with a renewed sense of purpose. Grant implemented new policies that prioritized transparency, employee well-being, and corporate responsibility. He and Anna worked together to establish a charitable foundation focused on healthcare initiatives. Inspired by the care Anna had shown him during his recovery, the foundation became a symbol of the company's transformation, a way to give back to the community and ensure that Carter Enterprises was no longer just a business, but a force for good. One sunny afternoon, Grant and Anna stood on the rooftop of the Carter Enterprises headquarters. The city skyline stretched out before them, a testament to the progress they had made both personally and professionally. As the wind tousled Anna's hair, Grant reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know it's only been a short time since we said we love each other," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Anna, you've given me a second chance, not just at life, but at love, at happiness. I don't want to waste another moment without you by my side." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Anna's eyes filled with tears as she smiled through them. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, of course." As Grant slipped the ring onto her finger, the weight of the past faded into the background. Together, they stood at the top of the world, ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. This time, they would do it together, stronger, wiser, and more deeply in love than ever before. A new path forward. The soft hum of the hospital machinery was gone now, replaced by the quiet shuffle of life moving on. Carter Enterprises, once teetering on the edge of scandal and collapse, stood stronger than ever under Grant's renewed leadership. But the true strength wasn't found in the numbers or the revitalized boardroom. It was in the small, meaningful changes Grant made every day, steps he never would have taken before meeting Anna. Their relationship, forged under the weight of life's most challenging moments, had grown into something that neither could have predicted. For Grant, love had been an abstract concept for most of his life, something that happened to other people. But with Anna, love had become something tangible and vital. She had been the light that guided him out of his darkest days. And now, she was his partner in every sense of the word. Anna, too, had changed. Her self-assurance as a nurse had blossomed into a quiet confidence that extended far beyond the walls of the hospital. The woman who once struggled to assert herself now stood side by side with Grant as an equal, offering counsel and perspective that often shaped the direction of Carter Enterprises. Together, they weren't just rebuilding a company, they were redefining what it meant to succeed. The day of their wedding dawned clear and bright. In the private garden behind Grant's estate, a small group of friends and family gathered to witness their union. White flowers lined the aisle, their fragrance mingling with the crisp scent of autumn leaves. Grant stood at the altar, his gaze fixed on Anna as she appeared at the end of the aisle. She walked toward him slowly, her dress catching the sunlight as a gentle breeze stirred the fabric. There was no grand orchestra, no towering cathedral, just the quiet intimacy of the moment and the depth of emotion between them. When Anna reached him, she placed her hands in his, her smile steady and sure. "I never imagined I'd be standing here," she whispered, her voice carrying only to him. "Not just because of you, but because of us. I never thought I'd find someone who truly saw me, who valued me for who I am." Grant squeezed her hands gently, his eyes locking onto hers. "And I never thought I'd be lucky enough to find someone who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Their vows were simple, but no less heartfelt. They promised to stand by one another in every trial and every triumph. They promised honesty and patience, understanding and forgiveness, and when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from their guests was genuine and warm, a celebration not just of their union but of the long journey they had taken to get there. The reception was just as intimate, held beneath strings of soft lights and surrounded by loved ones who had stood by them through the years. Laughter filled the air as stories were shared, and when Grant led Anna onto the small dance floor, it was as if the rest of the world fell away. As they swayed to a gentle tune, Anna leaned her head against Grant's shoulder. "I still can't believe how far we've come," she murmured. Grant tilted his head to rest against hers. "And it's only the beginning," he said quietly. "Everything we've been through, everything we've built, it all led us here. I can't imagine my life without you, Anna." She smiled softly, closing her eyes as they moved together under the warm glow of the lights. "You're the reason I started to believe that no matter what happens, things can always get better. And you're the reason I know they will," Grant replied. As the night wore on, the garden lights seemed to shimmer just a little brighter, and the laughter from their guests echoed softly against the backdrop of the stars. For the first time in years, Grant felt truly at peace. There was no looming threat, no betrayal waiting to surface, no uncertainty clouding the horizon. There was just the steady pulse of love and partnership, the The feeling of having someone to share every moment, good and bad. A few weeks later, Grant and Anna stood on the rooftop of Carter Enterprises. The city stretched out before them, bustling and alive, just as it had always been. But today, it looked different. It felt different. Grant slipped his arm around Anna's shoulders, pulling her close. "It feels like a new chapter," she said, her voice soft but filled with hope. "It is," Grant agreed. "We've been through so much. But I think we're finally where we're supposed to be." Anna glanced up at him, her expression thoughtful. "What's next?" Grant smiled, his gaze drifting out over the skyline. "Anything we want, Anna, anything we want." And as they stood there together, the future seemed boundless, full of possibilities they had never dared to dream before. It wasn't just a new chapter, it was a new story entirely, one they would write together. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Millionaire Love Stories. Have love and resilience ever changed your life? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. Subscribe for more stories of love, transformation, and the power of connection. Together, let's believe in the magic of love.